Hey everybody, welcome to Luca Talks Sports, part of the Sports Talk Line network where we talk sports 24/7, 365. I'm your host Luca DeAngelis, and for this week's episode 5, I'm going to be joined by Evan Birchmore. So Evan is a contributor to the Fansided network with Swarm and Sting, which is a Charlotte Hornets news and opinion site. He's an avid sports fan and writer who aims to combine his passions to bring engaging content to all audiences. So with the show with Evan, we're going to be discussing Charlotte Hornets basketball, season that just passed, as well as, next season. We're going to talk a bit about LaMelo Ball, about some draft targets, free agent targets. And we're also going to talk about the NBA playoffs as well. We're going to be talking about what we've thought of them so far, predictions for the remainder of the playoffs, and even talk about like the Eastern Conference playoff picture for next year. So looking forward to this week's episode. Hey, Evan, thanks for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Glad to join.
Yeah, I know that it's a big ask getting a diehard Hoops fan to take a time out of playoff basketball time to Zoom, but, with time differences, I guess it's probably better than the alternative of, being up at midnight and doing this, right?
No, absolutely. And if there's one thing I love, just as much as watching basketball, is talking about basketball with other fans. So glad to join and be able to talk some hoops.
Yeah, I'm glad I got you here, and I'm glad we teed this up. So you're in Charlotte right now, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, you're the. I consider Charlotte one of the homes of basketball. I know it was technically it was founded in Canada and then it made its way down, but I mean you've got North Carolina like UNC there. You've got some of the best basketballers in the states have like come from Charlotte. So you guys are a bit of a basketball hotbed over there, I'd say, right?
Yeah, I would agree. And just the state of North Carolina as a whole, and you think about, you mentioned UNC, you have Duke right up the road. So what I would say is the best rivalry in college basketball, being Duke and UNC. Wake Forest and NC State have been good programs. Obviously, you have the Hornets here in town. Michael Jordan is from Wilmington, North Carolina, obviously a partial owner of the Hornets here now in Charlotte. And then what's crazy is actually recently I went through and just kind of created a mock sort of roster of current NBA players from North and South Carolina. And the list goes on and on, Chris Paul, Chris Middleton, Zion Williamson, Steph Curry, Seth Curry, the list goes on and on. So it's definitely a hotbed for basketball. Maybe not the first place people would think of
No.
when you think of just areas of the United States where basketball is big, but definitely a big basketball area for sure.
Yeah, I didn't realize so many good players. Like I knew it was a bit of a hotbed, but I didn't realize Zion was it from there, for example, or Chris Middleton. That'd be a pretty competitive roster if you go up against
Yeah,
them.
yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Middleton is from down in Charleston. He went to a private school called Porter God, which I'm actually familiar with. And then Zion did his high school in Spartanburg, South Carolina, about an hour and a half down the road from Charlotte, but was technically born in Salisbury, which is not too far out of Charlotte here in North Carolina. So, and another one, how did I forget? John Morant from South Carolina as well. So really got the point guard position well represented in the Carolinas.
Yeah, I wish. So, like funny random anecdote. So I was actually meant to do exchange at UNC Wilmington,
Okay.
but the time I had it lined up, I had the choice between you weren't allowed to do exchange in the last semester of your degree. So I would have either had to deliberately extend my degree out by a semester to do exchange, or I would have,
Okay.
or give it up. So I didn't do it in the end. But I made some when I was playing basketball interstate for my university. There was people from UNC Wilmington who were on exchange here, like in Wollongong. Well, I'm in Melbourne, but they were in Wollongong, and so
Okay.
I made friends with about a bunch of them. We had a great time. Like we went out. I showed them around my hometown of Canberra a few weeks later when they were visiting there, and I'm still in touch with some of them today. Like I've gave me a really good impression of the area, and yeah, they spoke highly of it. So I still haven't been to Carolina, but it's but because of the friends that I made who went to school there, it's actually pretty high up on my bucket list the next time I go to the States.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so are you born and bred in Charlotte? Is that where you're from as well?
So I'm actually from Columbia, South Carolina. So right down the road, it's about an hour and 45 minutes from Charlotte. But just moved up here after college. Kind of just wanted to not, stay in the same city where I grew up. for my entire life, and it wasn't too far up the road. Not too far out of the comfort zone or anything, but just bigger city, NBA basketball. I got an NFL team here. There's kind of more going on up here, and I love South Carolina still. It's definitely just kind of more of a small town sort of place. The same group you grow up with and all. So, which to me, there's nothing wrong with that. I just sort of wanted to expand and see where things would take me.
Yeah, same reason I relocated too, so I totally get that. And so, being from the Carolinas, you would have grown up a Hornets fan too, right?
Yes. So for the longest time, they were the Bobcats, and so it's an interesting history. The Hornets were founded in the '80s, late '80s, here in Charlotte. So before my time, and had a pretty successful first stint here in Charlotte, but then relocated down to New Orleans and became the New Orleans Hornets, and then Charlotte got the Bobcats in 2000 and the kind of early 2000s. And the Bobcats really struggled pretty mightily. They made the playoffs twice. Once was in 2010 and another time was in 2014. Both times they got swept. Once was by the Magic with Dwight Howard on their way. Back when they had Dwight Howard and Jameer Nelson, that core. And then another time was by the Heat with LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. And so they got the playoffs twice and they got swept both times. So not a whole lot of great history with the Bobcats, but yeah, I did keep up with them. It's interesting though, being in Columbia, there's not any professional sports in South Carolina. It's very much a collegiate sports sort of atmosphere. And so really the first team I actually liked, and it's fairly random, but was the Phoenix Suns.
Oh, wow.
And the entire reason I liked them was because of Steve Nash, and they were on TV. And I just loved his craftiness with the basketball, his handle, how it seemed almost effortless to him. It was honestly just beautiful basketball to watch. The ball movement, that sort of 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns team. I remember I would just watch those teams, and they were so much fun to watch. And then the next team I sort of became a fan of was the Celtics, the Big Three Celtics with Paul Pierce and Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett. And I really liked them because many people don't know, but Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen are both from South Carolina. And so a bit of a home state connection. So Garnett was from a small town called Malden, South Carolina, which is near Greenville, not too far from where I grew up. And then Ray Allen was part of a military family, so he moved around several times, but was over in Sumter, South Carolina, and actually, which is the same area where Ja Morant is from. So he and Ray Allen are from the same area. But long story short, that there's a bit of a connection, and I loved, the way they played, and became a big Rondo fan, the early Rondo days, and he's still going, in the league to this day. But that was sort of that next team I latched on to. There just wasn't a whole lot of, energy around the Bobcats, I guess. And I had been to some games and all, but now with the Hornets, LaMelo, obviously, I think things are really going in the right direction. This past season was big, so definitely very excited for the future of basketball in Charlotte.
Yeah, it's. I think the Bobcats never, from an outsider's perspective anyway, like down here in Australia, didn't feel like the Bobcats had really captured the Charlotte, like the hearts of Charlotte sports fans. Like I remember, like I was born in the early '90s, so even though I wasn't like around for like the Alonzo Mourning stuff, like a lot of the old tapes I'd watch when I was a kid were of like the Mourning and Larry Johnson era Charlotte Hornets, and they were exciting, man. I mean, first of all, the Hornets had the coolest home court, like the actual court in like what was the arena called again? The original one. You guys had the coolest markings on the court though, and
just the center court logo, that retro kind of '90s style that it seemed like all the teams were kind of trending towards. At that time.
Yeah, I remember. I loved being Charlotte on the old NBA Live games because of the courts as well. So, yeah, and then obviously getting relocated to New Orleans would have been tough, especially because I think not long after is when they drafted Chris Paul.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So losing the franchise and then them drafting, probably the best player in franchise history, it would definitely have to sting, no pun intended. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Chris Paul, a home state, product. He's from Winston-Salem, played college at Wake Forest. It's little over an hour away from Charlotte. So that was kind of a perfect match. And unfortunately just kind of came a few seasons too late.
Yeah, but now Charlotte basketball, like you said, it's exciting to watch. And
right.
Yeah, there's a bright future ahead. So yeah, I actually because LaMelo Ball played basketball down here in our local league, I actually had more of an interest in Charlotte as a neutral than I probably otherwise would have. Like
Right, right.
it's a bit of a smaller market, and they haven't had those those big names that you normally when your team's not on that draw you to watch the games. But I was just really curious to see how LaMelo ended up, like how he performed because he did struggle a lot down in Australia. I thought he would eventually be a good NBA player, but I didn't think he'd be good. I thought he'd be a bad rookie. I'll be honest with you.
Kind of
But
growing pains
yeah, yeah,
type of year, right?
like he was a sub 30% 3 point shooter down here. He took some really bad shots. His defense was awful. The one thing that he did at a high level in Australia was his passing. I think he led the NBL in assists. But I don't know whether it was he grew or whether it's the NBA system was better for him or a mixture. But he really, really impressed me this year. He was outstanding when healthy.
Oh, absolutely. I would 100% agree. And I think in a way, going to Australia, playing professional basketball at such a young age, it was obviously difficult in the moment, but I'm certain that he came out better for that and having that experience playing against men, grown men and kind of getting beat up a little bit and then coming over to the States, you have that under your belt. And, the NBA is the highest level of competition, obviously, but sort of having those experiences playing professional basketball, it's hard to replicate that. I think, and I think that definitely benefited him. That and the passing, like you say, that's passing. It's shooting. I think can be worked on and can be improved. And there are people who are natural born shooters, I would say, and have that gift. But shooting, you can develop just repetition and time in the gym. But passing and court vision, which LaMelo definitely has, it's kind of one of those gifts that I feel like players they either have it or they don't. And he definitely has it.
Yeah, like you can work on passing to an extent, but you're not gonna. You can work on it as much as you can, but you're not going to be LaMelo Ball. Whereas
Right.
you can work your way up to. I mean, you're not going to be a Steph Curry if you work on your shooting, but you can probably work your way up to a high 30% shooter if you're not a natural shooter. I mean, you got Jaylen Brown in Boston who was a trash shooter coming out of college, who's now a 40% 3 point shooter, and you've
Right.
got
Yeah. He couldn't shoot at all in college, and now he's, you know, one of their second best player behind Jason Tatum, I would say. So
yeah, and he's a sniper now. I mean, Kawhi Leonard couldn't shoot in college, and he's a sniper
exactly.
now. And I mean, even to a lesser extent, like Aaron Gordon went from being one of the worst shooters I've ever seen in college to he's a passable shooter now. Like he's not one of those like elite like floor spacers, but he's a decent free throw shooter. He's a decent 3 point shooter. Like it's something I didn't see coming either. So you're right, shooting can be worked on, and LaMelo does have a bit of space to grow as a shooter. He wasn't as bad as he was in Australia, but he's got a lot of improvement to go there. But yeah, you can't teach like that court vision and that passing and that creativity. And it made Charlotte basketball really exciting to watch. Like him and PJ Washington and Miles Bridges there's a lot to like in Buzz City coming up.
Absolutely.
And that actually leads me to my next point. So yeah, like it was a improved year, but still some work to go. But you do have a very good draft pick coming up this year. Like 11 is for a team that's pretty good already for a lottery team, and a team that sorry, let me restart. So you're pretty good for a lottery team. It's a very deep draft, so being at 11 is actually not a bad spot to be in. So for viewers who aren't aware, you write for the Charlotte Hornets Fansided blog. What's the name of the Fansided blog for the Hornets again?
Oh, Swarm and Sting.
Swarm and Sting. So
Right.
being one of their writers, you'd be all over draft stuff, I'd imagine.
Right.
So what do you think of this draft class? And I guess what are your thoughts in terms of what directions the Hornets could go?
Absolutely. And that's fantastic you ask. I actually had an article published today that was sort of a roster projection piece for next year. So both free agency and the draft. And in that piece, my opinion on what will happen, I guess it's sort of a balance between a realistic scenario, but also something that I think would benefit the team. I actually have them drafting Alperen Sengun at 11. He was the MVP of the Turkish Super League as an 18-year-old this past year. So highly impressive. That's a legitimate, talented league over there in Turkey that he was a part of. So his sort of player profile, if you will, he's very skilled big man. His comparisons that I found are Nikola Vucevic and Domantas Sabonis. So sort of that European, tall, just skilled big man, excellent footwork. He does have some room to grow as a shooter, especially from 3-point range. So on the season, he only shot 19% from three, and he only attempted 21 threes. So he was 4 of 21 for the entire season from three. So that's a bit concerning. But like we just mentioned, shooting, is a skill you can work on. And what gives me some hope on that and shows some promise is he did shoot 81% at the foul line. So it's not a situation where his shot is broken by any means. He has a good shooting stroke, and I've watched the film on him. But I think just something where, again, you get in the gym, you work on it, you get a shooting coach with him, and even the attempts weren't 21 attempts over an entire season. It's not very many at all. So it wasn't even like he was really utilizing that as part of his game. And now another thing that is, I don't know if I would say concerning, but it is something to make note of is he's 6'10". And so as far as a center in the NBA, that is a little bit on the shorter side. Whereas one of the other prospects who's been rumored to come to Charlotte is Kai Jones out of Texas. And he is kind of your more traditional frame as far as a center. He's a little bit heavier. He's 7 feet tall, longer arms. Sengun's arms are a little bit shorter than those of Kai Jones. Now, Kai Jones is very, very raw, too. Whereas Sengun, I think, they both sort of project as prospects. They might not come in immediately and contribute like an Evan Mobley will, for instance, or at least as projected to. The product out of USC. But with Jones, he didn't even start playing basketball until age 15. He's from the Bahamas, so an international player as well. Just one of those, again, who has all the raw talent in the world, all the ability, but just sort of those technical basketball things, your footwork, not fouling, being in the right position at the right time, not being caught in between zones on defense, that sort of thing. Kind of the more technical basketball is where he potentially has room to grow. But there are several prospects who've been, mocked to Charlotte, and obviously with the litany of mock drafts that are out there, you're going to get different products. But as far as center position goes, which is definitely the number one priority for the team this offseason, the two names to watch are Sengun and Jones.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. So I'm doing a full first round mock draft for Lake Show Life. So it's not just the Lakers first round. It's going to be every pick. And I actually had Kai Jones going to you guys, funnily enough. So I'm glad that we're in agreement there. Sengun's an interesting prospect. He's very, very skilled, very, very high upside kind of guy. Once he gets acclimatized to the NBA speed, I think Kai Jones is really high upside too. He's very raw. He didn't get big minutes in college. I think he was 22 minutes a game as a sophomore for Texas. But most encouragingly, he improved out of sight as a shooter. He was he went from being 50% from the field and 29% from three as a freshman, and then he shot those numbers up to 58 and 38% respectively from the field and from three, and his free throw percentage went up by 6% as well in that same time. So I think part of that is because he's so new to basketball, he still has so much room to grow. It does mean that he also has that high bust potential, it's a high risk, high reward kind of pick. But yeah, he's shown enough flashes where he could really lock down that center position, which is probably the one problem position in Charlotte at the moment. Sengun, his defensive numbers in Turkey are actually really good. I don't know how that'll project to the much more athletic NBA, but if he can be a defensive anchor at 6'10", and it's still not going to affect his defense at the 5 position, then he with the offensive skill that he's shown on tape and where he's projected offensively, he could very well be the best pick there for Charlotte. And I think a third guy that's been mentioned, I don't know if he's projected probably usually a bit after your pick, but the third guy that might be in the mix if you really locked in on a center would be Isaiah Jackson as well. So
yes,
he gives me,
I have seen that one.
Yeah, he gives me big Mitch Robinson vibes. He's really, really, really probably the best rim protector outside of Mobley in this class.
Right.
But, it comes with being very limited offensively as well. So I think you prefer, the two centers that you mentioned just because they've shown a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball, and I guess you want that big that can play in the pick and roll with LaMelo and can pick and pop as well. But yeah, he's probably a third name that I'd probably keep an eye on for as a potential pick there at pick 11.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that your article contained, some projected free agents as well. So I guess as a Hornets fan, who do you want them to target, or the front office to target?
Right. Yeah, so sort of continuing on the trend of centers as sort of the position of need, you look at the center market this offseason, and kind of the big names to be watching out for are going to be names like Andre Drummond, Rashawn Holmes, Nerlens Noel has been floated out there. Mitchell Robinson is a restricted free agent up in New York. There's several others. Jared Allen on the Cavaliers as well. So sort of in my piece, and like I had mentioned, I tried to keep it realistic while also optimistic. And so in a perfect world, maybe you could get a Jared Allen to come in on a very team-friendly deal, and he would leave Cleveland and come to Charlotte and contribute right away. But I kind of broke it down player by player, and with those sort of top of the market players at the center position, I think all of them have, I don't want to say drawbacks, but reasons. They have reasons to either not come to Charlotte or stay where they are. Particularly, I'm thinking Jared Allen. Cleveland is incentivized to keep him. Well, first off, he played very well for them. And second of all, they turned out very well. They got him as part of the James Harden trade from Brooklyn when Harden went to Brooklyn earlier this season. And so they have no reason to want him to leave. They have every reason to match any offer for him and retain him because they did very well to get him in the first place. Andre Drummond, I think, would contribute very well defensively. Now, offensively is where I have questions about him. We saw in the playoffs. Now, obviously, Anthony Davis got injured in the playoffs, but I don't really believe that they were the greatest of matches on the court. Drummond, very much an old school sort of center, doesn't really stretch the floor very much at all. And not that you have to have a 3-point sniper, at your center position, but it definitely does help and not, sort of clogging the lane, especially on a team where LaMelo attacks the basket and Miles Bridges attacks the basket, and you can have PJ Washington down on the block, and Gordon Hayward can drive and Terry Rozier can drive. It probably wouldn't be the greatest of fits offensively to have him. Rashawn Holmes, coming off a career year, he was a defensive anchor in Sacramento, although the team defense was not very good. He individually was very good. My concern with him is I think he might have played so well that he's priced himself out of what Charlotte would be willing to pay. Now, the interesting thing with Charlotte, too, and with several teams, especially these sort of smaller market teams, is you almost have to pay. I kind of unofficially call it the small market tax, where you're not going to get like the Lakers get Andre Drummond on the buyout market because it's the Lakers and there's LeBron and Anthony Davis and they're championship contenders. Or Brooklyn gets Blake Griffin, that those sort of transactions, that doesn't really happen for Charlotte, right? You kind of have to attract players and maybe pay them a little above their true market value. And I like Rashawn Holmes a lot, but I'm not sure if he's one that I would, lock up on a long-term high dollar commitment when Charlotte's kind of gotten burned on some of those type of deals in the past. So in that piece, to conclude, I do have Nerlens Noel sort of projected to come to Charlotte. So he's unrestricted in New York. So he'd be a bit easier to get than Mitchell Robinson. He's also a little older than Mitchell Robinson. So I think New York might view Robinson as sort of the more of a future-oriented piece of the roster. But Noel, definitely, he was the number 6 pick back in 2013. I would say he hasn't really lived up to number 6 pick status, but I'm still a fan as far as somebody who can come in and help your team be better and contribute as far as on defense and, playing in the paint. Now, he, again, doesn't really stretch the floor a whole lot, but as far as just giving you some minutes at center while we develop Sengun or Kai Jones, I definitely could see some value in having him on the team.
Yeah, I think Noel's probably the best fit out of those guys for Charlotte. On Andre Drummond, he's not very good. Like he's had his moments defensively, and I know his advanced defensive numbers are really good, especially early on in Cleveland when their defense was ranked pretty high early in the season. But the thing is, so you don't need your big guy to be a floor spacer, especially when your power forward would probably be PJ Washington in most lineups, and he can shoot.
Right.
So it's not as important there. It's just that he's really inefficient inside offensively. Like, he's probably one of the worst interior finishers in the NBA. Like, if you're not gonna shoot threes, you don't have to be DeAndre Ayton and finish at a historically great level inside like he has his playoffs. But you want a guy that makes the shots he gets at a high clip. And Drummond doesn't do that, and Drummond demands touches down on the block when he's got very poor post footwork. So yeah, I don't think he's a fit. I mean, I think Allen's a fit anywhere, but I think Cleveland, you're right, that Cleveland are going to do their best to keep him. I'm a big fan of Noel's. I think he got hard done by in Philadelphia. He got caught in that process mess where they ended up having like 3 or 4 centers on the team, and
right,
and ended up getting him to bounce around. And look, he hasn't lived up to that high draft status, but and he's still a very limited offensive player, but he's one of the best defensive bigs in the league because he's one of the few centers that can switch onto guards and still capably defend them. Like, he's got really good feet. He's really good in a switch heavy scheme. You know, if he's forced to play on a wing, like, I mean, you never want your big guy on a wing, but he'll do a better job than most centers. So I think he's also really good if you end up targeting one of those raw centers, pick 11, is you lock him up for a couple of years. He's a really good transition player. It limits it. You don't need to give Biyombo minutes anymore. Like, Biyombo can just fade into the ether.
Yeah, and I actually have Biyombo projected to not return, so he enters unrestricted free agency this summer as well. He and Cody Zeller, actually, so both of the centers on the roster, or the 2 centers who started primarily for the team this year. And so I did project Zeller to come back, although on a much lower salary. I think just that there is some value in for one, I see him as the better basketball fit, but again, I see him as that sort of good locker room guy, good mentor for the younger players. He's the longest tenured Hornet. He's been here since 2013. So maybe not the guy he's not a franchise altering centerpiece, but you know, there is some value in that type of a player where they've just been around the block. They know the building, they know the guys, they know the coaches. They can help the younger guys grow. So I could see some value in bringing him back. Yeah, and to elaborate on some of those points, like you said, as far as Drummond not being able to really finish at a high clip inside, it's interesting you mentioned. My mind immediately went to Game 5 of the Bucks-Hawks series and how Brook Lopez he just took over the game, right? And he wasn't really killing him from outside. It was stuff in the paint. It was stuff around the basket. And I was watching it almost like, man, I forgot, Brook Lopez was an all-star at one point. He's the all-time leading scorer for the Nets franchise. He's a good player. And it's almost like this modern NBA, you sort of forget that style can work, but it obviously worked to a very high degree the other night. And he wasn't really, again, killing him from outside. He went 14 of 18 from the floor, and he missed his only 2 3-point attempts. So really, he went 14 of 16 when you remove those, and everything he wasn't just, like we say with Drummond, it wasn't like Lopez was getting the ball on the block, dribbling for 10 seconds, and then turning around and putting up a hook shot. It was more so he was cutting and diving to the basket, and he was getting lobs that he would dunk, and they're, very high percentage looks, but it wasn't this ball dominant sort of pound the ball into the floor type of offense.
No, that offense doesn't, unless you're like a Joel Embiid, that offense doesn't really work in the modern NBA. Like, you have to be, I guess Jokic as well, but that's because Jokic is a passing threat, and with Embiid, it's just because he's got such good footwork. You need to have an elite skill if that's going to work. Like, Karl Anthony Towns, it also works for him when he does decide to do it, because he's probably the best shooting center I've ever seen. So,
right.
And then you've got Ayton, Ayton doesn't pound it very often. Ayton more finishes off cuts and lobs and all that. But Ayton's also a very good finisher inside. So
yes.
you need to have an elite skill if you're going to be that ball dominant kind of big. And Drummond, I think a lot of NBA players are supremely confident, but he's not aware of his limitations. He thinks that he needs to be that 20-point per game guy. Whereas if I had Drummond on my team, and I currently do right now, but moving forward, if I had Drummond on my team and he averaged 11 points a game, but he shot 60% from the field on on the interior and he averaged 14 boards and he played really good defense, I'd be thrilled. I don't need him to be that 20
absolutely.
point guy. Like you don't need that from your center in a lot of NBA offenses.
Right.
And like you guys have
like you say, there's several ways to go. I mean, Rudy Gobert doesn't shoot threes, and he's obviously a centerpiece in Utah. Now they got bounced in the playoffs this year, but I would say he's a prime example of that. Now he's sort of he's probably the best defensive center in the league, so it's not fair to compare this free agent class to that, per se. But I definitely agree with your point. You don't have to have a team full of 3-point snipers by any means. But when those guys are on the interior, they need to be able to contribute, down there and not, be just horribly inefficient and kind of bring things down in that way.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, Charlotte alone, like you've got Terry Rozier who had a career year. Gordon Hayward had an awesome bounce back. Obviously, we've talked about LaMelo already and Bridges and Washington, and you've got Devontae Graham who comes off the bench. Like,
yes.
Firepower is not an issue for Charlotte. You just need that big man defensive anchor who can, fit within the team. And I think you guys, I think next year is the year that you become a proper playing team. Like, you weren't far off this year, were you? You were one spot.
No, yeah. So we did. We were 10th at the end of the year. So we were part of that play-in tournament, and they went up to Indiana. And,
that's right. You got smashed.
And dropped the play-in game. Yeah. But before we kind of hit a rash of injuries all at once. LaMelo hurt his wrist, and then Gordon got hurt and never came back, and a bunch of different guys sort of got hurt. And then the other part of that people didn't really mention was that the guys who were healthy had to carry such a bigger load that at some point I think that sort of took a toll. Like Terry Rozier, for instance, started off the season very well, and kind of toward the end of the season, things, he was still playing well, but he was just being asked to do so much that he wasn't, I'm sure that took a toll on him physically by the end of the year. But right before all those injuries, they were fourth in the East, so would have been in position to host in the first round. So, and I definitely see, I did write another piece as well that's sort of an outlook for the Eastern Conference for next year, where I sort of broke things up into tiers. And it's before free agency. It was even before the playoffs had really gotten into full swing. It was published about a month ago. But in that, just assuming no player movement. Now we'll see what happens with Ben Simmons and some other guys. But I definitely still see Brooklyn and Philadelphia and Milwaukee as sort of that top tier in the East, assuming, again, they bring everybody back. And even if Simmons leaves, I would still see Philadelphia being up there just as long as Embiid is there and as long as they get, some good return on Ben Simmons. But Charlotte, I definitely have as that second tier team, along with very many other teams. Atlanta has obviously proven that they belong in this playoffs. I see them being, very solid for years to come. There's other teams, New York had a great year. Miami is always solid, especially, Jimmy Butler coming back. We'll see what they do as far as, pulling off some trades in Miami as well. So there's a lot of depth in the East, I think. So with that comes a lot of opportunity to rise up in the rankings next year.
Yeah, I mean, you guys could end up being the Hawks of this year, where you've got all the pieces, but then something just clicks and you go on a run. Like you do have, now that you've got LaMelo, you do have that guy who can be that transcendent player that elevates the rest of the roster around them. That's what I think Trae Young has done for Atlanta in this playoff run, where, they had all these great role players who could step up and have their moments, but, it's all surrounded by like elite playmaking guard who, can go off on his night, but also get the others involved. And I think that you guys have a really similar blueprint to what the Hawks have shown so far. The thing that actually helped elevate the Hawks, aside from, getting Nate McMillan over Lloyd Pierce, some of their free agent signings, but especially getting Clint Capella in that late season trade with the Rockets last year.
Absolutely.
He's been a great lob threat with Trae, but he's also that defensive anchor that you need as a big man. And Capella's made a big difference to the Hawks, and I think that's that one. Aside from Trae being a bit further ahead in his development than LaMelo, that one area where the Atlanta Hawks of the world are ahead of you guys is having that interior defensive presence. And so Yeah, if you can address that either in the draft or free agency, I can see Charlotte kind of being around that, that 4, 5, 6 seed that you were hovering around before all the injuries hit.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
and I hope so, for sure.
yeah, it's good. But basketball's better when the Hornets are doing well, I think. So yeah, I hope they're in that mix next year. So have you? Speaking of the playoffs, by the way, have you been following closely this season, even with
Oh,
Charlotte
absolutely.
out? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been following. So it's interesting. I always feel like so the Hornets are my team that I cover, and so I don't have a deep rooting interest anymore now that they're eliminated. But I definitely watch, and I feel like I end up just pulling for good storylines at the end of the day. And it's so crazy this year with the statistics as far as these aren't teams that have really experienced much success. These franchises as far as having any recent history of playoff success or championships or anything. We're so used to the Lakers and the Celtics and the Heat and the Warriors. Even the Raptors got one a couple years ago. It's nice to see some of these fan bases, and you realize that the fans and the players it's excellent. Fan bases and excellent passion all over the league, even in these places that you wouldn't really normally consider. But yeah, I've definitely been keeping up with things. It's been lots of fun to watch. Atlanta's sort of a division rival, so I can't say I've been rooting for them per se, but like we mentioned, just a very solid team. Absolutely. The Bucks, I love Chris Middleton. He grew up 2 hours away from where I grew up, so that's I like to see him do well. Phoenix, Chris Paul finally gets to a finals. Devin Booker, I would say was very underrated for a long time, and now is getting some attention and some hype. So there's just lots of good storylines happening this postseason.
Yeah, Booker was unfairly given that good stats, bad team guy like mantra, which I think is, in most cases, it's more like it's when the player's kind of ahead of the rest of the team on the development curve. You saw that with Booker with the Suns. You saw that with Trey with the Hawks until this year. I think you're seeing it with Luca and the Mavericks. Even though the Mavericks have made the playoffs the last 2 years, he's clearly, he's clearly a borderline MVP candidate, and the rest of the team's just not quite up to that level. So I think that narrative needs to stop. I think if you're a good player, you're a good player. Like basketball, even though it's a team sport, even though it's a star-driven sport, it's still a team sport. So you can't completely carry a team by yourself unless you're prime LeBron James. So yeah,
absolutely.
And like you said, none of these. So the Bucks haven't won since the 70s, I believe. The Hawks haven't won since they were St. Louis, which would have been the 50s.
Not even in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, they weren't even in Atlanta. So, and the Suns have only made the finals once when Charles Barkley ran into Jordan's Bulls at the height of their dominance.
Right.
So
right, they were good with Barkley. They were good for a couple seasons with Nash, and other than that, haven't really had too much success.
No, they and before this really bad run, I think the Suns had like the 4th best record since they entered the NBA up until recently, because they were always one of those teams that was just always above average and always well run, but they were rarely, aside from the Barkley years and maybe one of the Nash years, they weren't really a proper championship contender. But I think this year that they're going to win the title. Now, I don't know what the score is. I'm going to quickly check the score in Brooklyn and...
Go for it.
Not Brooklyn, sorry. Milwaukee and Atlanta.
Milwaukee, yeah.
It was close before we started doing the interview. It is now 69-55 to Milwaukee halfway through the third quarter. So assuming the Bucks hold on, I think... Because I think that the Suns have way too much firepower. I think the Suns are going to win in 5. I think it'd be similar, even if the Hawks somehow rebound and go through. I think the Suns have got too much. I mean, the only thing is, if Trae Young is healthy, I think just him alone could steal maybe an extra game. But whereas I'm basing this off Giannis not being back for the playoffs, based on the what we saw in the injury. Now, if Milwaukee do win, and Giannis somehow comes back and is healthy, I think that's going to be a hell of a series. I think that's one of those... I think it'd actually go the distance and go 7 games if both...
Yeah, I love that. And that's what I'm rooting for, just honestly, is I know for all the talk of how injuries have affected the playoffs, and not to deny that, they absolutely have. But if we could get a finals series that is not, I don't want to say determined by injuries, or because I'm not the type to put asterisks by championships, but where all the cards are on the table, so to speak. And I want to see Giannis in the finals. Just me and every other fan of basketball, I'm sure.
Yeah, like
at least healthy and out there with his team.
So. Yeah, no, I definitely want to see that as well. Like he's one of the most likable superstars in the league. He plays with such a joy, and he deserves it. He won the 2 MVPs in a row. He's been close, but just not quite there for a while. And he's been playing unreal basketball this postseason. So even though I do really like the Hawks because I root for Oklahoma in college, so I'm a Trae Young fan because of that.
Okay.
So I am rooting for the Hawks this playoffs. It's not my team, so like I'm of the opinion that I just want good basketball, and so I was really upset when Giannis got hurt. I thought he did his ACL. I'm glad he didn't, but you're right. Like I'm not going to put an asterisk if the Suns do win, like most people predict. I'm not going to put an asterisk on it. Like, there's a lot of titles have been decided with injuries. I mean, even my Lakers, like Bam and Butler were banged up last series. Like, the Raptors had Durant and Clay injured. Even the Warriors.
Right, I mean, you can just
keep going down the list.
Year just about and say something. So.
Yeah, the Warriors won when Love and Kyrie were out.
Kyrie, right?
Yeah, a lot of injuries in final series. So if the Suns win, they deserve it. I just want the best matchup possible. So that means if the Hawks somehow pull off this comeback, I want there to be enough rest so that Trae is healthy. Like he looked a bit slow today when I was watching before our call. So just enough time between the games to get him healthy. If the Bucks do end up holding on and winning, I know it's not likely, but I just really would like Giannis to be there because seeing both these teams full strength battling it out it'd be fun as a neutral. Like you just want both teams to be able to give their best shot, right?
Right.
So you're predicting the Suns too?
Yeah, I would take the Suns. So if Giannis can't play, I think, I would probably go 5 like you if Giannis can't play. Now, if he's healthy, I think I would still take Phoenix in 6. Now, what I see is interesting, and I like Giannis a lot. But I heard this the other day. I forget who had mentioned it. One of the national sports analysts over here in the United States. But really, it's interesting that Milwaukee, for as great and dominant as Giannis can be, it's almost they're not better without him. But the ball sometimes does move better without Giannis there. And for one individual game, I think that can work when the other team hasn't planned to go up without Giannis, on the other side. And so a Brook Lopez can go off and get a game for you. Now, over a whole series, I mean, that's why the better team generally wins these series. It's because you have to win 4 times in 2 weeks. And so you can have one thing go one way or the other and take a game. That generally doesn't happen for 4 games out of 7. And so I do think Milwaukee, sometimes the ball movement's better. A guy, maybe a Chris Middleton, a Drew Holiday, a Brook Lopez has a better game without Giannis there. But they would not have a better chance to win a series without Giannis, especially in the NBA Finals. There's just no way. And what Giannis brings on defense as well. Now, I'm not sure what his matchup would be. I don't see – so I'm thinking of Phoenix. I wouldn't put him on Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder is not a dominant offensive player. I wouldn't like to see him. Right. And Booker, Booker's more of a mid-range guy, so I could see Giannis taking Booker, but you wonder if he's running around chasing Devin Booker the entire time, if that wears Giannis out and limits his offense. Because in the Brooklyn series, I really wanted to see him guard Durant.
Yeah, that was inexplicable that he didn't.
And he was PJ Tucker on Durant. And Tucker's a good defender too. He's a good defender in his own right. But I'd be interested to see what the matchup would be on that one.
Would you put him on Ayton? Would you hide Lopez on Crowder and put, because Lopez is long enough to bother Ayton, but is he strong enough? Like Giannis would be stronger in terms of not getting kind of pushed around.
Right. So, and then I guess that would leave you'd have Drew Holiday on Chris Paul
and Middleton
on Booker. Right, because then I almost feel like Middleton is kind of so Giannis does a lot of this isolation basketball, and really just it's just sort of drive to the hoop, spin left or right, dunk over somebody, right? Middleton does the ISO, but it's more he's the better shooter
Oh,
between the
yes.
two. And so I wouldn't want to wear Middleton out too much because it might come to a point where you need him to go get a bucket at the end of the game and he needs to have his legs. But I do think he could take Booker. Maybe you could just do a platoon system, honestly, and kind of rotate guys off and throw different looks at him because Booker, a scorer on that elite level, I kind of have this theory. So, and especially in basketball, the way the rules are now, the playoffs get refereed a little bit differently than the regular season. But the offensive guy, again, over the course of a series, he's going to figure out the tendencies. And so, even if it's this world class defender, at some point, somebody on the level of a Devin Booker will be able to exploit some of those tendencies. And so, I think if you put Middleton on him for a little bit, and PJ Tucker on him, and Giannis on him, and Drew Holiday, and just throw all these different looks at him and guys with different defensive capabilities, that almost could be a good strategy, in my opinion.
I think it would be. Like, I actually have that same theory as you. I think that good offense always beats good defense in the NBA, just based on the ways the rules are set up. I do think Drew Holiday is the best perimeter defender in the NBA. It's been parroted by many NBA players, like in podcasts. He's the name that always comes up. But the thing is, then you'd have no one to match up with on Chris Paul. So this is where they miss Dante DiVincenzo. He's actually a really good defender, even though he's more of like a fifth option on offense for the Bucks. He was part of the reason why their defense is so good in the regular season, and he'd be the guy I'd put on Booker because you don't need him on offense as much as the others. So I would have had him as Booker's primary defender, and then throwing Drew and Middleton and occasionally Giannis and Tucker on him. I think there's going to be a lot more Tucker on Booker than there otherwise would have been, just out of necessity. If you're right, like you don't want Middleton to get worn out completely, and in the likelihood that Giannis isn't here this series, which I don't think he is, you need Middleton to carry more of that offensive load because if he can't carry the offense consistently, this series is done in 5 or maybe at best 6. Whereas if Middleton can play like he did. That game that he went off against the Hawks where he got like 6 or 7 threes.
Right.
Where he looked like the best player on the court. If he can play even like 80% of that, that would give the Bucks like a puncher's chance against the Suns even without Giannis.
Right.
So, I think there's something to that theory. And to your point, I agree. I don't think that the Bucks are better without Giannis, but they play better type of basketball because they're moving the ball around and they're not relying on the ISO drive to the rim as much. And I think this is true of a lot of teams. A lot of teams play a nicer brand of basketball without their superstar because they've got to be more creative in how they get buckets. So I wonder, like, I think the best blend of this was done with those Durant Dynasty Warriors because he was coming into a team that was already established. They still had the brilliant ball movement. They still had the, Clay and Steph and all that running off screens and Draymond orchestrating things. And then they'd occasionally go ISO ball when they needed an ISO bucket, and that's where Durant kind of shone. But they gave him some looks. Right. They gave him some looks in ISO, and they gave him some looks like within the offense. I think that is the perfect marriage of, taking advantage of your superstar strengths, but also, not at the expense of having a coherent offensive system.
Right. So, that was just that perfect storm of not only was obviously Durant available to sign in the first place, he came into a system where he fit perfectly. He essentially was just a very much better version of Harrison Barnes than what Harrison Barnes was. Obviously, Durant's the better player, but he, like you say, he wasn't coming in and just dominating the ball. He wasn't one of these players. There are certain players who are the system, and there are other players who fit into a system. And even a guy I think of LeBron, amazing player, top 5 player of all time. I do think he is one that doesn't really fit into a system.
No.
Wherever he goes, he kind of becomes the system, and then everybody else falls in line behind him. Even in Miami, he and Dwayne Wade, their games are very similar, or were very similar. These guys, they attack the basket, they kick to shooters, good passers, great court vision, explosive athletes. And so they really didn't have a system like Golden State where we're kicking the ball around, the shots are easy. You got Klay Thompson here. He's scoring 60 points. He dribbled 11 times, that kind of thing. And then you add Kevin Durant into that, who at that point, there's debate, but second best player in the league behind LeBron when he went there. Just there's a reason they proceeded to run off, 2 championships, and they lost 1 playoff game in 2017 the whole time.
Yeah.
The whole run, it was just this perfect storm on all levels.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it is asking a lot for teams to do that, but maybe there can be some form of a middle ground reached as well. Because I've noticed that a few times with stars going down in these postseason that teams are kind of forced to adapt and get to do some more of that kind of Princeton offense ball movement type stuff. So I'm interested to see how whether any teams learn from that next year and kind of try and add wrinkles to their usual like heliocentric offenses.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. It's, there's certain I think of like Philadelphia and Dallas, for example, where you have guys who like Porzingis and people, Porzingis didn't have the greatest postseason again in the series against the Clippers. And he's been a guy who, had injury. He's 7'3", so it's the human body at that size, and then you get hurt, there's some question marks, but then he's on the perimeter, and you say, well, hold on, he's 7'3". Why is he just shooting 3-pointers all the time? But it's because Luca's usage rate is so high, and Luca's dominating basketball. And I love Luca; he's an amazing player, but you can't have Porzingis on the block and Luca dominating the ball. There's really not an offense that can run like that. It's the same thing in Philadelphia. Well, not the exact same thing, but where Simmons can't shoot. And so Simmons goes down low and Embiid's out on the wing. And you say, well, Joel Embiid's one of the greatest post players in the league right now. Why is he out on the wing, shooting 3-pointers? That's what Tobias Harris is here to do. And that's what, we have these Shake Milton and all these players. That's not, what we need Joel to do. But when you have a guy who can't shoot, or you have a guy who dominates the ball, it kind of can get some other guys out of position for what they are best at doing.
Yeah, and to that point, I do think Simmons is going to move in the offseason. I heard that the Sixers rejected a deal with the Pacers that was Brogdon and a first-round pick. But so I think that they're still holding out for that kind of mega haul. But,
right.
Who knows if they'll crack and accept a lesser offer as free agency kind of... Well, not free agency, as the offseason rolls on.
Right. Now, I've been thinking what the deal would be. I like Brogdon a lot. I'm not sure... See, coming up, he was in Milwaukee, then he was in Indiana. He really hasn't been a guy he's been on good teams that have been in the playoffs, but he individually, hasn't really gotten a whole lot of attention this far, I would say. And you get a first. I like that deal for Philadelphia.
I actually do too.
Yeah.
I think Brogdon's
so I've heard it rumored that Minnesota is very interested. I'm just not sure. I really don't see them giving up. Obviously, they're not giving up Anthony Edwards.
No, and
not Karl Anthony Towns. I'm not sure what they would get back for him.
Yeah, I mean, it'd have to be D'Angelo Russell's not enough. It'd have to be an Edwards-centric package, and it's hard to see. Like, I know Minnesota are trying to do that because I think they want to have that kind of Cat Simmons pairing, but yeah. I just don't. They've used a lot of the bullets in their chamber, so to speak. So I just don't see them having that.
The other one I've seen that's interesting, and I like this one too, would be it would be Simmons to Portland and then CJ McCollum going to Philadelphia. Now, he's the rumor is Philadelphia wants an all-star level player in return. Now, McCollum hasn't been an all-star, but I think that if he had been playing in the East, he would have made an all-star team by now. The guard depth out west is just so deep and so many good guards that it's hard to. I mean, Mike Conley made his first ever All-Star team this year. Mike Conley's been one of the better point guards for a decade now, and he had never made an All-Star team until this year. So I can't really hold that against CJ McCollum, and I think that'd be a good return. I think he fits that team better. But again, if they're turning down, and I think McCollum's better than Brogdon, marginally. I don't think it's a huge gap.
No.
But Brogdon is a point guard. McCollum's more of a two guard. So I don't know if you'd start Shake Milton, or if you draft a point guard, or you hit the free agency market. it would create some more questions as well. But it would be interesting to see, what ends up happening. I do think they don't have to trade him. They're not going to be forced to trade him. But
No.
at this point, I feel like it would be wise to
try and get a return for him at least. Like, it's just, I don't know. It just seemed like they burnt a lot of bridges when after the post game comments after Game 7 and all the what the mouthpieces were saying. Yeah, it just felt like a lot of burnt bridges. So yeah, they don't have to trade him, but I think it's going to happen.
And we just get into this. I'm not anti-analytics by any stretch. I think there's a lot of value in analytics. I really like data analytics and how that impacts basketball decisions, but I don't think you can. I also think there is a place for the human element of a team, right? You can't just, the downside to analytics is it ends up reducing everything and everybody to a number. And so when you have these teams that are so analytically built and you don't focus at all on how these people mesh together as human beings, I don't even know if Embiid and Simmons like each other,
Probably
even
not.
a week of basketball. And that's not a small thing. You don't have to be best friends with everybody on the team, but you can't dislike people on your team. At least you can't do that and succeed at a high level.
No.
At a championship level. The best teams have, championship chemistry, and that is something that matters. And the other thing with Simmons too is the whole, people get on him for the jump shot, and I don't think he's ever going to be a threat as a shooter, but just the fact that he also hasn't really improved on it and hasn't really appeared that he's desired to improve it.
No, he says it every offseason and it just doesn't happen.
Even I think of a guy, I keep up with the Celtics too, like Marcus Smart was an atrocious shooter, still is not a great shooter.
But he's passable now, and he sometimes has those really hot games.
He can be a good shooter, and he can put up point. And he some of these players, I just don't know if they care. And Marcus Smart cares, Embiid cares. It's just one of those things where I don't think you can reduce that to an analytics number.
No, you can't put desire and heart to a number.
Yeah, there is some value in the human element of things as well.
Yeah, Simmons always strikes me as that guy. Where a lot of us Australians are frustrated that he's not playing in the Olympics for us because he keeps opting out at national level of national level competition because every time the excuse is need to work on my game. But where's the evidence? He's improved as a defender since a rookie, but he's actually regressed defensively. His shooting's gotten worse. His aggressiveness has gotten worse. He hasn't improved as a passer or anything like that. His rookie season, I thought he could be a future MVP, and the fact that
he's excellent rookie season.
He hasn't added to that at all. I'm jaded. I'm frustrated with him as a basketball fan. A lot of this, all of Australia was behind him, and a lot of us have turned on him because he keeps knocking back playing for the national team for an excuse that doesn't seem to fly. So, he says he's going to be working on his game this summer. I'll believe it when I see it.
Right.
Until the evidence is there, I'm just going to assume that he's going to be that same old guy he's been since his rookie season.
Right.
All right, I'm going to wrap things up now because we've gone for almost an hour because it's really easy to talk to once you.
Man, yeah, time flies when you're having fun. Absolutely.
Right? Once you start talking hoops, I probably could go for 2 hours to be honest.
I could go on and on.
Before we officially finish things though, so obviously you have active presence on Twitter. For listeners who are interested in either reading your articles or talking hoops with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, I am on Twitter, and that's where I'm most active as far as the basketball content is concerned. So my handle is at Evan Birchmore. That's EVAN BIRCHMORE. I'm on there all the time. I'll always reply to mentions, DMs, whatever that is. So I'm definitely still I'm active on there. It doesn't have to be Hornets. It can be any basketball. I'm always down to talk. And then as far as the actual content that gets published, so I'm part of a team at Swarm and Sting. which is through the Fansided network, and then Swarm and Sting focuses on the Charlotte Hornets. And so, I mean, you can just even run a Google search for Swarm and Sting, and you'll see our content on there. You can get to it through the Fansided page. The link to Swarm and Sting is in my Twitter bio as well. I have it as my website on Twitter as well. I am on Instagram. I don't really put a whole lot of the basketball content on there, but that's at EABIRCHMORE on Instagram. But definitely Twitter would be the place as far as the basketball content is concerned, where most of that gets focused.
Awesome. No, yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Evan. And yeah, on behalf of like all basketball fans who want Charlotte to succeed, best of luck in the draft. I hope you guys get your guy, you get your center, and that he pans out and he's not one of those, those old school Michael Jordan picks that used to happen when he was a Wizards owner, an early
Yeah,
Bobcat.
that's crazy. Yeah. And one thing I'll make it quick, but yeah, like you said, as far as the draft history for the back in the Bobcats days, it was very inglorious. There's the Adam Morrisons and Michael Kidd Gilchrist, and just take your pick. And then now though, as far as Mitch Kupchak as the general manager, now he's been here for a few years, and it's all been great. Picks. The things have turned out. LaMelo Ball, example one, but as far as Devontae Graham has come in under the Kupchak sort of tenure. Miles Bridges came in, and so definitely as far as the draft history goes, I think they're turning things around. So in the past, as far as the draft, it can be very hit or miss, especially when you get kind of outside of those top five picks or so. But I'm confident with the front office and the guys they have making those decisions. I think it's in good hands.
Yeah, I think so too. And and I'm sure we'll be able to catch up and discuss, maybe down the track how you guys ended up going in the draft or after the off season. Yeah, because
Absolutely.
it'd be awesome to have you back on the show.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely.
All right, thanks for your time, Evan, and take care.
Yeah, thank you so much. You as well.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. Had a blast as always with Evan. We ended up going for over an hour, slightly over an hour it was. Yeah, we touched upon a lot of the stuff that I planned to touch on, but we even got into stuff like talking about whether teams would benefit from a less heliocentric offense, ball dominant centers, and even the human element of basketball. Evan was an absolute pleasure of a guest to have on. He clearly knows his basketball, and we probably could have gone for 2 or 3 hours if we were left unchecked. So I had a blast recording the episode, and I hope you guys enjoy watching it too. And if you do enjoy like my show, make sure you tune into Sports Talk Line, not just for future episodes, but for all sorts of other great content. I mean, we discuss the NBA playoffs, as you'd be aware, but we've got the Stanley Cup finals happening right now. The MLB season is right in the meaty part of things. The Euros are, I think we're getting to the semi-final. One of the semi-final matchups for the Euros decided, and we've got the others coming right up. And, football season's just around the corner with training camp and all that. And yeah, if you like what you've heard from me or anyone else on Sports Talk Line, like, subscribe, comment, leave your thoughts. You guys are what make the channel what it is. So we appreciate any and all support that you're willing to give. I've been your host, Luca DeAngelis, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Luca Talks Sports.